Okay, we're getting started. Just waiting for a few people to get on the line. Jeremy was on a moment ago and I couldn't hear him, so he seems to be having a connection or a microphone problem. But I posted the link on the event page on Google, so click on the link and you can join the Hangout. And I hope you do before I get lonely. I'm not going to just monologue, not tonight. Hi, Dee. Well, I see that there are 10 people watching, and nobody has yet joined me on the Hangout. So you're all either very voyeuristic or there is some technical problem occurring, which wouldn't surprise me because every time we do this, we seem to have some technical glitches. Okay, speak to me. Somebody post something on the page. You know what's up. Are you having trouble getting on? See Ari, Donna, Jeremy, Dee, Peter, some entity named Sandstone Snowflake, and Donna. And Donna, I should say, I just read your post on the Infinite Conversations forum, and it was so delightful to read see you kind of paint the world of archaic humanity and the sense of being in the night and not knowing that the day will come. Utter silence, utter darkness of that humanity and the sense of being in the night and not knowing that the day will come. Hi.
Hey guys.
Utter silence, utter darkness. I'm hearing myself echoing some kind of like temporal recursive loop. Hi, Kim.
Nothing.
And Jeremy, I hear you. So, hey, we can start a conversation. And Peter.
Hey, Marco.
And Jeremy. Hey, Kim. So, hey, we can start a conversation. And Sandstone.
Hey, Marco.
Hey, Marco. And Jeremy. Oh, would you remind me of your name? So, hey, we can start a conversation. And Sandstone. This would make horrible real TV.
Hi, Marco.
Hi, Peter. It's good to see you. All right. So, is anybody having technical difficulties? Everybody, I seem to hear everybody, right? Jeremy, you're good.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh. Okay, good. Phew. I was worried. Good.
And Donna.
Hey Donna. Hey everybody. How's it going? Good to see everyone on. All right.
So I think we should make just some technical comments. Which is that you know that you can mute your microphone, and it's good practice to keep your microphone muted unless you have something to say, in which case just unmute yourself. Uh, Otherwise we get an echo effect and background noise, so just keep that in mind. And we're starting. It's just past 7:06. I think we were going to go for an hour, but it always seems to take some time for people to get on and for us to kind of work out the kinks of our interfacing. So maybe an hour 15. It seems that the conversation always wants to spill over a little bit.
Sounds good. So there's so much to cover. Can everybody still hear me okay?
Yeah, I'm just going to mute some folks.
Okay.
I'm going to note Zach
Paranoid.
is on the line. Hi, Zach.
Marco,
Oh, hey, Zach.
Hello.
Sorry, Peter, I think I muted you just as you were about to say something.
no, I was telling you I don't know how to mute it myself. Can you do it?
Okay, yep. There's a little microphone icon, and when it's muted, it'll be red, and when it's open, it'll be white. It should be right kind of center above your head if you're looking at yourself. Little control buttons.
Let's see. Okay, good. A couple of folks are trying to get online, hopefully. Be able to hop on with us. Good. We're getting a little better at this, slowly and surely. All right. So, where to begin? This is like my second time reading this part of the book through, and it's been a very interesting reread for me, in that I'm trying to be a little bit more careful with my reading, and there's so many interesting things that we could go through here. But I guess we're doing the last. Oh, hey, cat.
Rosemary.
Adorable. Ever-present
She's
origin.
20.
We're doing week 1's reading during week 2's talk, if that makes sense. And then next week we'll go over the next 70 or so pages that we go through. But last week was kind of an introduction. So hopefully this week we'll go a little bit more, as we did in the first talk, into or in the second talk, into more detail. But so I wasn't sure how to open it up, except to kind of there's just so many interesting things to bring up. During our first talk, we talked about how Gebser described origin and temporality and timelessness, and sort of how all of that kind of weaves itself in the present moment, or just in the present. And there's a couple of interesting passages. I guess I'll just start sharing. I feel like that's how we can kind of get going here. But I found it interesting that on page 3, Gebser says that this deficient that is destructive. Oh, wait, no, that's not it. One second. Well, he's talking about the difference between sort of the individualism of the present structure of consciousness, of the mental rational, and then the, as he calls it, aggregation of the magical and mythical, are both kind of rearing their deficient heads in our time. And when a deficient structure is sort of popping up in culture, it's a sign that, of course, it's time for some kind of new or emergent thing to happen. And throughout this opening first 30 pages or so, it's kind of interesting how Gebser takes time not to paint the original, not to paint the magical and the mythical structure so much, but to really kind of set the context for our moment. and really beautifully describe the emergence of perspectival space and the awareness of space. And every once in a while, he'll just kind of jump back and be like, and as a reminder, we're going through something similar now with the emergence of time. But what struck me really, and maybe I can kind of throw this out to everybody, is that there's so many examples. There's letters, there's paintings, there's so much that you have to kind of go through and stop your reading of the book and then look up these images on Google and get a sense of what Gebser's describing. There's so much material that's describing the emergence of space. And then he starts to talk about the emergence of time, and he only goes into that a little bit at the end of these first few chapters with Picasso. And I know Jeremy Strawn brought up a really good question, just sort of asking, can we when we look at Picasso's painting, do we understand, can we tangibly experience the emergence of time in that image? So I think that's a kind of interesting place to start. I'm going to kind of stop rambling now and let everybody speak up. Anybody who wants to, just unmute yourself.
I'll talk, if that's okay. I was kind of just being on that part of the book at the moment as well. I'll just read one quote because it's kind of stuck with me. It says that time is no longer spatialized but integrated and concretized as a fourth dimension. He continues, it renders the whole visible to insight, a whole which becomes visible only because the previously missing component, time, is expressed in an intensified form as the present. And he calls it the pure present, the quintessence of time that radiates from this drawing. And he's referring to the Picasso there. And so I keep struggling with these dimensions of space and time. It's just so radically new concepts of just trying to conceive time and space from the unperspectable to the perspectable to the aperspectable. Just, it's almost like I'm dealing with physics here. It's really kind of making my mind stretch. So we look at Picasso's painting, and he's saying that we're looking at the figure from the front, the back, the side, all at once in this two-dimensional image, and he's calling it the pure present, when to me it seems more like it's like almost like a whole section of time here. I mean, he uses the metaphor of the artist or the viewer, sorry, walking around the person, and that's what you would usually have to do in the perspectival world to get all those positions at once. But now he's just giving it to you all in one 2D image. So that's where I'm at. I'm trying to, yeah. He's saying this image encompasses the aperspectival. So if someone would like to continue from here, that'd be good. Give me some clarity.
Yeah, Donna, do you want to? Let's see. I see your. Hold on. Let me try to Can I unmute you? I can't unmute. You gotta unmute yourself, I think. It's a little button.
Okay.
There you are.
Yes. Yes. Who was that spoke last? What was his name?
Oh. Sorry, what's your name again? I see Sandstone.
Sandstone. Yeah. Well, yes. Can we call you Sandstone, or should we call you something else?
Please, Sandstone.
Sandstone. Okay, great name. You've got it. That is what Picasso is depicting there. Imagine that you're looking at that picture, but you're seeing all aspects of it. When you were speaking, it kind of made me think of a holograph. His painting is like a holograph, which contains everything. but there's a time element in there too. Not only can you see the physical aspects of it from every perspective, but there has to be a time and timeless aspect of it as well, where you're seeing past, present, and future all together. I try to look at Picasso's art now with that understanding that that's what he was trying to do, that that's what Cubism is. All the perspectives in one plane.
That's interesting, Donna, because he mentions a few. It mentions Cubism, Expressionism, and a couple of other artistic movements or painting styles that were all, he says, imperfectly trying to concretize time and working with time. And I think he mentioned something like that elsewhere. I'm not exactly sure what page it is. I had to have the note here, but oh, page 16. To your point, he describes artists as these kind of important forerunners for this emergent structure, and sort of finding a way to kind of get it in the world and to realize it through some kind of poem or artwork, or as a kind of, again, a struggle to realize. And I think that's kind of interesting, and to consider art that way. It's a kind of emergent or nascent, or what do you call it, a latent kind of thing, sort of like canary in the coal mine, but not in a negative sense. But like the really sensitive creative types might have some kind of evidence for us to look at. And I just started to think about that today. I don't know if you have any thoughts about contemporary artists or contemporary, if anybody has any.
He has another reference to an artist I can't remember. He's talking about painting rooftops in Europe, and he said that a Renaissance painter who painted it very carefully would capture the shadow of the sun at some precise moment in time. And if you could look at the painting, and if you knew how to do it, you could figure out what the exact moment in time was. But he said this other painter painted a similar scene, but somehow had the shadows merged together so that you can't see any one particular time. You see all the moments of time during the day in the shadow in the painting. I thought that was another example of the concretion of time.
This is probably a side note, but it's kind of interesting. Just knowing that, since Gebser wrote this, there's been so much interesting countercultural literature about, pre-modern civilization and how advanced that their senses of time were. And they had a very different sense of time than we did. And that seems to affirm Gebser's point, but also kind of add another layer to it, like the highly complex awareness of geometry and sacred geometry, and the very minute tracing of celestial objects and the heavens and star charts and that kind of thing with, let's say, like the Maya or Mesoamerican civilizations. So there seems to be a kind of totally different way to kind of look at the cosmos and have a kind of almost science behind it without being in the perspectival consciousness. So that was kind of interesting too. Does anybody want to chime in with another? Oh, I see Donna. Donna, the other Donna. Yeah, I see you. If you can just press the microphone button, it should be in your video box on the top. It looks like a little mic. It's probably red right now.
I'll unmute you.
Okay.
Just press the microphone button.
Oh, there you are.
Your video box.
We hear you.
Probably red right now. I'll unmute you.
It's interesting that we're experiencing our own time phase shifts in this call.
Oh, I can't wait to geek out with everybody.
We're hearing we're experiencing multiple angles of time at the same time.
It's interesting that we're
I
experiencing.
think Donna, you may have the chat open in 2 different windows. If you have the YouTube video on, it's going to be playing with a 30-second delay, and I think that's what's catching up with us now.
You may have the chat open in the window. If you have the YouTube video on, it's going to be playing with a 30-second delay, and I think that's what's catching up with us now. You may have the chat open in the window. If you have the YouTube video on, it's going to be playing with a 30-second delay, and I think that's what's catching up.
Oh.
You know what I think we should do? Just to make a suggestion, I think we need to do like just a tech support hangout. You know, where the only thing we do is we schedule it at some point where the people who are having trouble getting on, and with the technical aspects, we just do like a training or something like that, separate from any intellectual discussion. Maybe we should schedule that, because it happens every time. There's always like 1 or 2 people that just have some problems, and I think it's just, you know, it's a fairly complex technology actually, and it takes a certain, like, I feel like when we're doing Google Hangouts that there's a lot of cognitive complexity in, you know, kind of seeing everybody's faces, managing, you know, the connections, even the conversation itself, because it has to bounce among so many different perspectives. So it's like almost training for a perspectival, maybe. You know, we could look at it that way, perhaps.
Douglas Rushkoff has a great book called Present Shock, which is about digital time. And I would recommend that for anybody who really wants to geek out about time and technology and planetary consciousness.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like, to get back to the discussion, and hopefully Donna will come back and we'll be able to hear what she has to say, and if not, I will set up. We're going to do it. I think it's important. You know, it's like we can't. It gets in the way of the conversation. So the better, you know, the more that we can get people sort of synced up, I think the better. But to the point, you know, it's interesting. I've been thinking about the word, the reason why Gebser uses the term mutations, and you know, we talked a bit about this I think a couple days ago, but he distinguishes between the mutations of consciousness, spiritual mutations, and biological mutations, and sort of, you know, historicized mutations, where you have this kind of story or a myth of progress. But the word mutation itself, it still has this, and I don't know if it's the same in German. It seems to be that it may be the same, but it seems to have this almost like freakish quality to it. You know, like things come out like malformed, you know, like they don't come out perfectly the first time. They come out partial, they come out broken, they don't quite work, and then it's like that happens a few times here and there in time, and then it happens with more frequency, and then suddenly you get these mutations that are more fully formed and that are sort of like Da Vinci, right? It took a while to work out perspective, and you have all these failed experiments before it emerges in a whole form, and then once it's in that form, then it can begin to manifest more multidimensionally, right? It can begin to manifest not just in a poem or not just in a painting, but also in institutions, right? Also in technologies. It becomes effective, right? Efficient, perhaps, is another is the word that Gebser uses. So anyway, I just want to riff one more thing, going back to sandstone. You know, I'm experiencing the same physics, the same sense that I need to think differently. I need to think in these very, it's almost hyper abstract, but also hyper intimate terms. You know, like it's so etheric, but also so present. And it brings me back to the book that we were reading just before Ever-Present Origin, which was a novel. It was called The Dispossessed by Ursula Le Guin, and it's about a physicist who travels. He's an anarchist physicist. He lives on an anarchist world, that is a twin world to a more sort of capitalist world. And this anarchist society has been living solo for 120 years, something like that, split off from their home world. And he's a physicist who's developing what he calls a theory of a temporal theory of simultaneity, simultaneous time. So he's trying to develop a physics that is it's called simultaneity, and it's distinguished from sequency physics. So time as progression, time as linear, to time as sort of co-present, like multidimensionally co-present. That is very profound. Like that's to me it's like it's an intense contemplation of what exactly that means, And so that Picasso painting is like one way of kind of feeling into it, but it seems like that there are examples like that all over the place, where it's like time is blurred, time is smeared, and we're getting these sort of these experiences of like time phase shifting, and not just sort of discrete moments, that you could kind of line up or that you could place in a grid. It's not exactly sequential time, and even if like we sink into our experience of it, it doesn't unfold the way that the perspectival mind, the rational mind, would construct it. So that's really interesting, and like actually kind of living in that space and using the book as a contemplative sort of tool to explore that, I think is really interesting. And Donna, actually, the piece that you wrote on the forum really did that for me, like in the way that you went back to archaic sort of night, to the experience of night without time. Like that really takes, I think that takes one to a different space in thought. It takes you to a different consciousness. It's a mutant sort of consciousness. So I'm finding that really, really fascinating about this reading.
So
Yeah.
can I add something?
Yeah.
Sandstone, do you want to go ahead?
No, I'll go after you then.
So Marco, you were talking about wrapping your head around these things and ways of thinking. Actually, the integral structure integrates all the modes of being, which include more than thinking. They include being and feeling and knowing. I like to take myself back to the archaic and the magic consciousness of timelessness. And Gebser mentions that the communication in that time was telepathic. There was a knowing. And that takes me to quantum physics and the concept of quantum entanglement, which is the principle that one particle can simultaneously experience the same thing in another particle that is millions of light years away. That's telepathic. And it's got to relate to the telepathic way of communication of Magic Man. Before Mythic Man dawned with his mouth and using words and telling stories. But for me, it all does relate to the earth and the sky. We are not separate from the earth and the sky. Our presence and our observation and our experience of everything that's going on in the earth and the sky and the sun around us informs our consciousness. I don't see how our consciousness can be separate from earth and sky. unless we believe that somehow our consciousness came from somewhere else, which a lot of people believe, that our consciousness was seeded from some alien source. Maybe it was, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe it is the experience of the earth itself. I don't know. I get tongue-tied. I'll let someone else talk.
You brought up a good point about Earth and Sky. You reminded me of the Minoan Prince image that Gebser uses. It's probably worth noting this was in our week's reading a little bit toward, let's see if I'm trying to find the page for folks who have their books, page 62. And it's just this really striking image, and the first time I saw this image, it struck me. It made Gebser make sense for the first time, I think, in a very visceral sense, where he's describing this prince, a 2D image, of course, and he's standing, and there's grass at his feet, and his torso is painted with the sky in the background. So he's part of the earth. There's a mountainscape behind him. There's vegetation by his legs and his feet, but his torso and his head, and he's got this beautiful feathered crown and flowers. That's all in the sky. It's all in this beautiful starry sky. And Gebser is describing this image as a kind of a beautiful expression of this evolution or transformation of consciousness from the mythic, the kind of vegetative mythic consciousness, because he's literally got garlands on him. He's literally grounded in the ground, and then he's emerging out into the sky, this kind of new awareness of time, and he relates the sky and the stars to time, which makes sense in a kind of mythical sense of astrological time and astronomy. So just a really beautiful image, and sort of understanding that that's where these things aren't inactive in us, like he mentions it so many times. That an awareness of time isn't it's not just for the physicist to kind of go, oh, here's this really cool equation, and it makes sense of everything. It's to kind of understand that the past is alive, and it's not even what is that T.S. Eliot quote, right? T.S. Eliot, the past isn't even past. So it's a sense of the past being alive in us, and this struck me as that very much. And I feel like we're jumping around a lot, because with this topic, we're talking about time, we're talking about perspectivity. You can go to the perspectival, you can go to the unperspectival, you can go to the aperspectival, and they kind of all play with each other in a kind of interlinking. But it's interesting that you mentioned telepathy, Donna, because I was just thinking of Marshall McLuhan and his whole writing about the emergence of electronic culture, and how the first thing it did with the development of the telegraph was to remove distance and remove the obstacle of space. Suddenly and immediately, space has been superseded by instantaneous communication between 2 points. And that's kind of almost like a forerunner to quantum physics and the internet and all this kind of huge quantum shift in our consciousness. And it's so mundane to us even today that we're not even like, we have to stop and think, what? The telegraph was probably an early sign of this integral aperspectival consciousness. We're not, so it's hard to even think of it in that way, because it's a technology, and it's something that we would maybe relate more to perspectival, but it has kind of blending of both, I feel. And my final rambling point, Marco, on mutation. Mutation is a really cool word because it's such a science fiction implied word, and science fiction has really gone off with this, with all sorts of X-Men, and so many of these characters in sort of modern mythologies have this narration of mutation. They're describing some kind of leap in human evolution, like with X-Men, or Superman is an alien, but still there are these giant variations in human ability. And it does include telepathy, which is interesting, these kind of supernatural powers. But it's interesting that this is coming up in culture, and this has been happening in culture since, the atomic age, right? Mutation and the atom bomb and nuclear power. So there's interesting themes in the 20th century that kind of, I think, highlight what Gebser is describing in his hunch about the term mutation. And I guess if you wanted to kind of go into a footnote with this, you could definitely check out Jeffrey Kripal's work, Mutants and Mystics, because he explores this whole idea of mutation. Why is this so important for modern mythology through media and comic books, and how it has a kind of evolutionary meme behind it. So I'm going to stop rambling. But if anybody wants to chime in on something they found interesting from pages 1 to 73, like just feel free to just jump in with something.
Can you all hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Yes, great. Okay, cool. One thing, like hearing the conversation that we've had so far that's interesting to me is going back to Picasso's representation of time. One thing, hearing the conversation that we've had so far that's interesting to me is going back to Picasso's representation. There we go. Okay. And on Marcos' thoughts about simultaneity versus sequentiality. I think that what we're doing right now is a present representation of that, because we're right now in our own times, experiencing our own time, but then sharing our own time with each other through this digital means. So we're sharing our simultaneous experiences of time through YouTube, basically. And then the reason why I thought about it is because you hear the quotes like, there's thousands of hours of YouTube uploads every minute or something. Well, how does thousands of hours fit into a minute? Well, it's because simultaneously time is being shared now instead of only sequentially with our single perspective. Anyway, that's the thought I had on that.
That's awesome.
And secondary, I was really having a hard time getting the unperspectival for a bit, because I was like, no, there's perspective there, it doesn't feel right to me, until I realized that what he's making a distinction between is just a specific, distinct perspective versus I can't remember where the quote is, but he says, we're not just in the unperspectival, in the art, you don't have particular what's it called when you draw a particular person's portrait? No, there's no portraits. There's only these poets and princes and these archetypes, right? So it made me think, oh, maybe the unperspectival is the archetypal. At that point, we were experiencing archetypal consciousness, so we had a perspective, but it wasn't a unique perspective. It was just my perspective as my role in my clan or whatever. Anyway, that's my second thing. I don't know if did that second thing make sense? I felt a little bit lost on that. Okay.
I think it did. I wrestled with that too, just kind of going over it again and again, okay, what does he mean by unperspectival? Because these guys had awesome temples and all this stuff that definitely required an awareness of space. But yeah. I guess the way he's describing it, these are not. It's not our kind of space. It's these are geometric shapes and forms, and then they could be super realistic about the body, and creating great the Greek sculptures of bodies, and super realistic about musculature and everything. But at the same time, they're usually, you know, heroes, gods, kings. There's
Exactly.
no like, oh, here's Joe Schmo from the street, and we're gonna do like that kind of like painting a quote unquote nobody was this
Yeah.
scandalous thing. Like nobody had done it before, and it's just amazing, even like reflecting that. You know, we there was a time where we didn't even do that, or didn't even think to do that with art.
Yeah, totally. And also, like when projecting out, then I'm not seeing unique individuals either. I'm also seeing symbolic representations or archetypes of people. Like I see the mother, the father, maybe the king, but I'm not seeing like, yeah, particular people. And the same thing I was thinking probably has to do with the way we're seeing things in our space too. We're seeing symbols, not necessarily the particular fruit I'm looking at. I don't I don't know. I'm not looking at a fruit right now, but yeah, the particular thing, but more like a symbolic. What that like you said, the psyche was still mixed up with the world. That's yeah.
Henry Corbin has a great description for that, but he's a little difficult to access just because of the denseness of his writings. But I would definitely recommend sort of a philosophical biography by Tom Cheetham called "The World Turned Inside Out," and Corbin is just this great theologian, philosopher who basically is saying what you're saying, that, you know, before the scientific revolution and sort of the modern age, pre-modern societies had a kind of imaginative participation with the world. And they didn't distinguish the inner world from the outer world, or didn't even need that distinction, and that didn't come till later, where we bottled all of our archetypes and mythology into the self, and then suddenly we needed psychology to kind of have all of that erupt back, you know. And then there's Jung and Freud, and the eruption of the psyche. Gebser talks about that too, as this kind of I think towards the beginning when he's talking about artists, I thought this was interesting, analogous to what you're saying here, and maybe a little bit of an insight into why there's been so much of an interest in pre-modern society and indigenous spirituality. It's because, you know, not only is the past alive and efficacious, but if you jam it down there, it's going to kind of be this pressure cooker, and then all of this psychic heat is just going to explode, and so the artist who's going into themselves is going to first have to deal with all of these intensities that they haven't been, you know, looking at for so long. So it's kind of interesting to think of the 20th century as this time of just a kind of psychic eruption of all of these previous structures that have been repressed or ossified or whatever. But cool. Yes, repressed shadows.
So let me see if I understand this, because I'm not sure I do. To Zach's point about the unperspectival relationship to space, because obviously there is a relationship. I mean, at least looking at it from our point of view, if you're building a pyramid and you have a geometry that's really precise, you have to have some spatial capacity, right? It's not like space doesn't exist. But is it correct to interpret that to mean that what it actually is that space is not differentiated? It's not seen as its own objective thing. In other words, space is really just bound up. It's bound up in your stories. It's bound up in your mythologies, in the gods, in the polarities between earth and sky, between good and evil, between light and dark. So it's just that it's not that you can't manipulate in any way. That would make sense, because then you can build a pyramid. And we know that not only are the pyramids geometrically awesome, but they're also cosmically configured, right? So they are in intimate relationship with the skies, with the stars, you know, with everything around. So, but that aroundness is not seen as an abstract quality. You know, it's not differentiated, and I think the idea of perspective, the emergence of perspective, which Gebser talks about in terms, he gives the example of Petrarch, the poet, seeing landscape and then writing to Sir, one of the, I would like to look that name up because it was the coolest name in the book thus far. I think it was a Christian monk, but he writes a letter to him describing his experience of landscape and how disturbing it was actually to him to kind of see space as this objectified thing, as this thing outside of him, this thing that just expands outwards, and that's like this mutation, right? That's the experience itself. The experience itself is a mutation, which then of course now we have a tremendously sophisticated conception of space, such that we could point a ship to a planet 10 million years away, and have it arrive and take photos and send those photos back to us fairly accurately. That's incredible. But that comes only because we're able to abstract space and subject it to mathematical understanding, to physical understanding, and then through Einstein relativity to this relativistic understanding, which also begins to take into account time. So it starts to lead into these next mutations where we're realizing that time is, like Zach was saying, not all sequential. That there could be more time in that time could fold in on itself. I guess you can pack many hours into 1 minute. You can pack many different times into space.
Mark, I'm kind of reminded, just kind of between the dialogue between the two of you, for the unperspectival, wasn't there a description as that being like oceanic? And kind of, I got the sense of, maybe I'm making that up, but I kind of remember there being a description of oceanic versus like space. Does anyone else remember that in the reading? Because that, for me, that gives me like a kinesthetic sense of like what it would feel like to move through that space and time, to be in relationship to my surroundings. As I really like this idea that Zach was sharing about like archetypes. And I was just imagining myself on a conference call where the first thing at work that everybody does is announce their role so that everybody can like, play their part in the conference call, and authority and and structure and all that. But I was like making a little distinction between like role versus archetype, and how archetype is more kind of like fluid, and then oceanic, like kind of like almost like that magical space, and like what that would feel like to like operate in that. When I was taking an art history class, it was my first experience working just in an academic perspective from the time period of the Baroque. And I remember it was the first time I was introduced to this, like, some earlier stuff that was like this flat art, and then you could see perspective like popping in. And so I love that we're talking about that right now. And I just got back from Paris, so like I was looking on my phone at like all these pictures from the Picasso museums. My brain was just like really bright in terms of the feeling of experiencing Monet and Picasso and some of these masters, like what it felt like. And what I felt in that space of like, witnessing that was I felt a spaciousness inside my own belly, like inside my own body, of like, seeing Monet and seeing like the clouds reflected off of the water, and I could feel the water, and I could feel the lilies kind of like floating there, but I could like see the clouds just like gently there, and then I was like, wow, like he really got a lot of like, for me, kinesthetic somehow sensitivity into the use of color, and somehow he was able to get that space in there, but like as a kinesthetic experience for me. Like I go to the DMA to see that piece behind me. I don't know if you can see it up there. Like this is the one water lily thing we have of Monet, and I go there once a year because I get this like little just high of like kinesthetic like spaciousness in my belly that I normally don't like feel. And to actually go sit in front of like gigantic Monets was just like totally amazing. So like that kinesthetic sense, and Donna was kind of pointing to this earlier. So I'm kind of like trying to tie together like my brain power of like thinking about archetypes, individual, like that shift between like archetypes and symbols and roles and that kind of magical space to the individual. And I can kind of feel like I can feel that. Like one is like where you're just kind of like navigating almost like a little worm in the earth, like kind of like, just operating in your surroundings. Whereas like when I think about Monet, it's like, oh, it's like I'm here, but what the fuck do I do with that? And it's just like there's a space, but like where, just in exploring that individuality and just one last little point is I just had a conversation with my brother, and we were talking about spirituality, and a person in our family who has, demonstrates a lot of spiritual capacity. And my brother said, well, I've had these spiritual experiences or these awarenesses or this, but he said my rational brain, which is why I'm bringing it up here, he said my rational brain does this to them, and he puts them over, he said, okay, I put them over here, and just like, I don't deal with them because they don't fit my rational perspective. So even having that capacity to say, okay, I'm having experiences that don't make sense to me, and so I'm going to put them over here because they don't fit in a worldview that's really useful. Right, so that's like that regression to magical. It's like, what is really the step forward for like the aperspectival that integrates the magical, integrates the individual, integrates the rational. But like, what does that actually look like? I mean, because while art's interesting, it's not really, I can feel it. It's not necessarily transformative, or it's still subjective. Like, what's the thing that we all will share where we can say like, hey, this is legitimately a different perspective? And I really struggled with reading about Picasso because I'm like, well, so what? Right? He's having this experience. He had a relationship with a guy, which kind of came out in the reading, but I kind of got like a little bit of a so what after reading it, because I'm like, well, that was his experience because he already had that capacity that he was developing. But in terms of like other people that are functioning just in the rational space, like, what's actually that thing that's going to push them across that realm into the aperspectival? You know what I'm saying? Because even this dimension where we're interacting right now that Zach talked about, it's like, okay, we have all these different video conferences going on. It's still within the rational realm. Like, what does it actually feel like? What's the experience of connectivity, of a shared intellectual space, and how many people are actually aware of the connectivity, like on a kinesthetic level, as we're interacting, as these different consciousnesses through video conference, right? I think a lot of people would just like kill it at the rational. But I guess my experience, my question is like, so what, unless there's that deeper inquiry into the shared experience of what it's like to actually connect. Like, a couple of us have been on a few of these calls, like, well, what's that, what is that shared consciousness actually kind of like stimulating in you? Like, are you having weird dreams? Like, are you having insights? Are you noticing anything differently? And I'm kind of like, I'm sorry to tie all this together at once, but it's just like, well, okay, well, that's great, but like, I sit down and I feel like I have the flu when you guys start talking, because I'm like, oh my God, this is just so much in my system. But like, am I crazy? Or like, are you guys actually getting something out of this as well? Like, in terms of like what it's like to connect with a bunch of people trying to like actually formulate some sort of conversation around this stuff. So like, I'm kind of say, okay, the reading's really interesting, but like, what are you experiencing right now?
Can I throw something out there?
Yeah.
So listening to you, an image pops up for me for a way that I can grasp the experience of the different structures. I think it's analogous to the ontological development of a human embryo. So try to imagine yourself being a 4-celled embryo within the uterus of your mother. And then growing in that uterus, there's no light. There's just this pulsing kind of sensation that would be the archaic. And then you squeeze through this tunnel and you enter into this world where light comes into your eyes. You're experiencing the world a whole new way as an infant. And as you grow as an infant, you reach an age where you become self-aware that there's a difference between you and that person next to you. You realize there's people, there's personhood. And then you gain a knowledge of perspective. I remember very clearly an experience I had when I was maybe, I'm going to say 5 years old, 6 years old perhaps, of discovering perspective. I remember distinctly walking around the corner of the sidewalk in my neighborhood and looking up at the sky, and all of a sudden the trees, the clouds, and the blue sky popped out into 3 dimensions right there in front of me. That was a life-changing experience for me, to become aware of that. There are more things that we are becoming aware of. Like, do you ever remember hearing that story about islanders centuries ago who had never ever been visited by Europeans? And Europeans came to their island in a ship, and the natives on the island could not see the ship. They could not physically see it because they had never seen anything like it before. It was invisible to them. Imagine how many things are invisible to us because we cannot conceive of them existing. I'm like dying to see the things that are all around me that I can't see because I haven't woken up to the possibility that they exist. I mean, that's happening to people all the time, I think, where they discover things that they never knew existed before. And it could be things that you and I, you know, we've already become aware of. We know they exist, but there's other people in the world that haven't discovered them. They don't know they exist. And it's not just things, it's concepts as well. And Jeremy, you were talking about telepathy and the telegraph, and that got me thinking about, this is going on another vein here, but you know, there's fungi that lives in the earth, under the ground, in the forests, and under the grass, that's communicating throughout acres and acres and square miles of space, and they're all communicating through this fungi. We're a part of that too. I think the quantum leaps that we take to new structures of consciousness are truly experiential. They're not intellectual. We get tied up in our underwear with all this intellectual going back and forth, but real consciousness mutation is experiential, not intellectual. And someone mentioned the movie, what's the one about gravity being love? Was that Interstellar?
Yeah,
Interstellar. Yeah, I love the concept of gravity being love, that attractive force that pulls us together. That, I think, is really the next frontier of a leap of consciousness, is our personal relations with each other, our love for each other, and putting that into action and experiencing personal interrelation. And our mental structure, one of the deficiencies of it is an isolation from each other, separating us from each other. You know, here we are connected by the internet, but still we're separate. So we have to take what we're learning here in this virtual hangout into our actual hangouts with our people, our friends and our family and our coworkers and the people you pass on the sidewalk and everybody. I actually think that's where our next frontier is. Interrelations.
I guess not to be negative, but I do think, you know, we're looking for something a little bit more tangible, and right now it's difficult to feel like, you know, okay, here's the emergent structure happening in this beautiful way, and I think there are examples of that in art, in poetry, in music, in storytelling, in different forms of storytelling, in different forms of communication. I think that's all very evident to me, but another aspect of it is the kind of disorientation that that we're experiencing through the internet. I think, as Zach was saying, technology and our sense of time through things like the internet and cell phones and electronic communication and interconnectivity and information overload and all of these things that are happening, including things like WikiLeaks. This sense of transparency. Gebser always talks about transparency, like seeing through. It's a very literal expression of seeing through. It's not exactly a spiritual interpretation, but nonetheless, I feel it has some kind of connection to that kind of diaphanous spirit. This idea that secrets can't even be kept anymore, and we're all experiencing a kind of what Douglas Rushkoff calls present shock. And I think I think Gebser would appreciate that term, present shock. We're literally being, because he describes the origin and a perspectival as sort of, how all time is in the present moment. To actually experience that is very disorienting, and we're not used to that. And it may exhibit itself in a negative social anxiety as the current consciousness that we have is kind of wrestling with it and grappling with it and trying to master it. But it can't, and it won't. And so we all feel this kind of anxiety with time and the digital present now, which is our sense of time now, where it's always now. And we can't fit everything, we can't quantify everything into now. And we're trying to, be always online and always posting. And, that kind of digital time anxiety, I think, is a kind of mental, rational, deficient response to time. We're trying to figure it out. So the strains that you feel, the tensions that you feel, the social angst, I think that's a really good symptom of this kind of transitional space that we're in right now, where it's not a beautiful thing all the time. It's a struggle, and I think that's good to emphasize to you. But works of art, of course, like Interstellar, I love Interstellar because of how beautifully it expresses time, reaching back, the future reaching into the present, kind of thing. Not to give any spoilers, but I just wanted to say hi to Aaron, because Aaron popped on a few minutes ago. And Aaron was our Gebser Society president, and he's also one of the editors and founders of Daphne Journal, which is the Gebser Society journal. So I just wanted to do a little plug and say hi, Aaron. And if you want to chime in, just feel free. The way we're doing it, we're just kind of unmuting ourselves and plugging into whatever we want to say. Oh, don't hear you. I see you, though.
Does Aaron want to say something?
Me?
He's
Yes.
muted.
You might want to check, Aaron, you might want to check your microphone settings. Okay, we'll be back. Cool. So, yeah.
I can say something.
Please do.
Just on that time anxiety and kind of being in the perspectival, we get a sense that we're always trying to gain time, kill time, fill time, and it's almost like a fixation with space. This is what Gebser is saying, and it's because of this linearity, it seems, and that we're always trying to, he's saying that we're always trying to fill time like it's some type of bucket, and it's almost like we see time as being empty when he's saying it's really actually intrinsically fulfilled. So that was an interesting point. So I'm trying to now, from the perhaps a perspectival, understand a fulfillment of time in this space. I mean, right now it feels like there's just so much going on right now, and there's all these different perspectives that we're connecting with in this space. How can we try and how can we fill time when there's just so much right here that it is fulfilled with? And so that's, to me, was an important kind of jump from the perspectival. It almost like a pathology to try and always be trying to fulfill a timeless void Yeah, and I also just want to come back to the notion, the theory of simultaneity, and that perhaps there's also just a multi-layered time right now, that there's so many different ways we can perceive this space, and I've just been feeling into these conversations that we're having, and to go off what Kim says and what I'm feeling right now, it just seems like there's a global consciousness right now. There's a whole global number of perspectives in this conversation, this hangout, and that after I go away from this conversation, my mind feels like it's going to be trying to internalize all these voices. So in that sense, it's like all these spaces and times I'll be wrestling with it and trying to internalize this, this massive fulfillment of space and time. So it's almost like, just from a psychological point of view, I'm always wrestling with all these perspectives and trying to understand the aperspectival. It's almost like it's a multiplicity of these positions of space and times. And I'll stop there because I think I'm rambling. But does that make any sense to anyone?
I want to chime in because I know that there's a couple people who may want to be saying something but haven't yet, like Ari, and maybe Peter. I can't tell. You're a little bit inscrutable with your hand there on your chin. So just to kind of perspectively, sector this time a little bit to make sure that there's room for everyone. And Dia as well. I know you've had this YouTube delay issue, but we're kind of past the hour, and I think I'd love to hear from everybody because maybe the theme that can tie some of this together, to go back to Kim's point, is that we can do a perspectival right now, right? And that may be kind of what this is about, at some level, right? Like we can just do it by not presuming our separation, because the rational presumes the separation. That's a structuration that we set up, but we don't have to live within that if we don't want to. I mean, if we see another possibility, then all we have to do is step into that possibility. Of course, the old possibility will try to hold you back and kind of enmesh you, but we just disentangle it and move on. Move into the open. Telepathy or bust. So
let Julie go first, but I'd like to say something before we're done.
Okay. Oh. Don't hear you. You're mouthless. Well, I think, Ari, try. We're going to work on this technical thing. Okay, we'll work on it. And I'm going to make sure we set up some meetings where people could, get just develop an aptitude with the technology. Because, I mean, maybe this is all going to real, like, technologically enabled telepathy. I mean, that would seem to be what, is being prognosticated. We would have implants in our brains, and we'd be basically on the internet all the time. We wouldn't even need all these clunky intermediaries of screens and keyboards and stuff. I mean, we could just think ourselves to each other, and then, I mean, that, I'm not going to rant. I'm not going to ramble. I'll curtail myself, but that may be sort of the institutionalization or the concretization of this integral consciousness. It may require the internet. That may be where we exist. Not as another thing, not as something we encounter separate from ourselves. That these networks not being separate, these networks being the material of our existence, our rhizomatic being. Anyway, I'll stop there. Peter.
Oh, did we lose Peter? Peter, you there?
I think we have to see these technological like impediments as just part of like the, just part of like the mutational struggle. But we do have somebody who was trying to join before and is now here, Lauren, replacing Peter. Peter, you've transformed.
Hi, Lauren. Do you want to try to unmute yourself and say something?
She says the same as me.
Oh, Ari, we can hear you now.
Oh, you can?
Yeah.
You can hear me now?
The ghost in the machine has deemed you.
That is really weird. I guess it's my turn. I'm up. Well, first of all, I'm Ari. I didn't really get to introduce myself previously, and this is like really close to my soul, this whole endeavor. The thing I was going to say when I was going to make a comment earlier was I keep thinking of Jung's functions of consciousness, and I have kind of equated each of those with different mutational shifts. And for me, the a-perspectival is the movement into the quintess, or the sort of culmination of all of those things. And so, Gebser makes it really clear that the mental structure kind of attempted to leave everything else behind. It kind of attempted to just, like, now we're in the mental structure, this is all we need to know, we're in the rational kind of mindset, and the thing that got the most left out of that is, of course, the physical, it's the split between soma, psyche and soma. And from a Gebserian point, it's the archaic, which is like the sensate function. It's like the, I think Donna was talking about, or maybe not even Donna, but, and I have to learn your name, so I apologize, but our ability to be in our embodied awareness, that is the sensate function, that is the thing that's furthest from us, because it's the archaic thing. It's the first 0 point of consciousness. I mean, you see it in physics, like returning to 0 point and all these kinds of things. Like getting back to an embodied consciousness is very, very hard because we are so ingrained in the mental. But the return to that embodied sensate place of consciousness is not the same as it was when we were there the first time as a organism or species. It's a deepened place that includes the mental. It doesn't exclude the mental either. And so you have to really go back in your own self. And I mean, I kind of live in all these worlds myself. It's kind of how I move through the world, and I always have. I feel like reading Gebser for me is kind of the language of something I've always known. And so here it is, languaging this thing that I'm like, yes, of course, this makes absolute sense, because when you function in the world in that capacity, you draw on all those different modalities. You don't exclude any of them. So you rely on the intuitive process in yourself, and you understand that the magical process is how language and things come into form. It's just how things come into form. And the archaic is like what Donna said. It's like the infant. It's the Uroboros from a Jungian perspective. The Uroboros stage of consciousness where you're not aware of other. Other is part of you. There's no distinction, no discrimination between self and other. There's no ego in that. Gebser says it's an egoless perspective place. You're just connected with everything. And then the perspectival consciousness is where the ego steps in and says, oh, there's an I, there's an I and a thou, there's an I and another, there's a, and now it's the posturing between the I and the other. And then the a-perspectival says, there is an I and another, and we all exist in this space and time, and everybody's at a different place with it, and that has to be okay. Now, I don't think we're ever going to go into this idealized, and you kind of mentioned this, Jeremy, like we're not going to go into this sort of idyllic, everybody's happy, groovy, you know, getting along kind of a thing, because that is not the nature of the universe. You look at Vedic studies, not the nature of the universe. The universe is always in differing places of creation, destruction, sustaining all the time. And a perspectival is recognizing that chaos is always present. It's always going to be present even as something's emerging out of that. Okay, that's it. Sorry.
That was great. Thank you. Thank you, Ari. Let's see. Aaron, did you want to try to... darn it. Still can't hear you. We're going to have to have Aaron back on for a podcast. Lauren, do you want to try to unmute yourself too? See if the great Google Hangout will permit you to speak. I still don't hear you. Darn. Okay. Well, that's too bad. I hope we can get it going. Maybe Marco and I will try to figure out when we could do a hangout with everybody to problem solve.
We definitely should. I mean, I'm really committed to these calls. To these, you know, we're gonna do these twice a week.
Yeah.
And like, I have this attitude, like I just want to do it. You know, like just, you know, press forward. You know, press into it. It's like a rocket ship taking off. I mean, not to be too phallic about it, but you know, you have to kind of break a certain or you know, gravity. You know, in order to reach a higher orbit. You know, and so as long as we're using spatial and interstellar kind of perspectives, you know, there's a certain amount of struggle, a certain amount of effort I think one has to put into it. And of course, sometimes you let things happen, like Gebser says, and sometimes you make them happen. But I think that now is the time when we should make something happen, right? And try to get this working. You know, try to make. And I think it is. Speaking of the intensity, and then I'll shut up. It is intense. You know, I feel an intensity to it. I feel an intensification just doing this. You know, just being in this experience with others, and partly that's my psychology. I'm not used to being as, you know, out there. I'm more introverted or whatever. But partly I think it's just in the nature of the process that is entailed by doing something like this, right? So. Who else? Dee is there as well, and she hasn't spoken, and I think she was trying to earlier. And
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I've used the link from various places, and sometimes got onto the YouTube, and eventually have got back to the live call. The YouTube version tells me I'm live, but I'm not because I wasn't there. I don't actually think I can contribute anything meaningful at this point because it's all muddle in my head, but thanks. I'm with the intensity, I'm with the commitment. I hope I can keep it up for the full length of the book. And I found someone who has a copy of the book, so I'm 2 steps closer to being really with you.
Thank you for joining us.
Hey, Jeremy, am I getting through now?
Oh,
Yes.
yeah. Hey, Aaron.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, third time lucky. Yeah, I just wanted to maybe respond to a couple of points. I came in halfway through, so I missed the first maybe half an hour, but I think it was Donna who was talking about, or the lady before that, who was saying, so what? You know, you see these so-called aperspectival examples of art, and your response is, so what? And I don't know, one thing that helped me understand that was, you know, a lot of early 20th century artists were, that had the predicament of, like, photography came along. They weren't trying to make picture-perfect images anymore. You know, there's no need to represent the world from that fixed perspective because the camera could do it better. So what they're trying to express is, you know, and this comes out in a Paul Klee quote that Gebser himself cites, talking about how colors surge up from the roots of the world. And so again, it's a form of art which is not just the superficial world of color or appearance, but it's an appearance that renders present the deeper invisible forces that underpin and are always surging through our perception of the world. So I think a lot of modern art, where I think of it's modern art worth its salt, is trying to do something along those lines. And that's what, there was a big shift that was going on at that time, in particular, where artists were really not, they were just going right away from representational photographic realism, which was the norm, in the centuries leading up to that point. And another point I wanted to make, just in terms of trying to grok what a perspectival experience is, one insight I had, and I was talking with Eric Weiss, who was one of our former presenters at the Gebser conference in Los Angeles, and we're talking, and I'm not sure how it came about, but it kind of struck us that it's a little bit like, if you're having a dream, everyone here had a lucid dream where you're in the dream world, you're in that mythic imagination, and then this other consciousness erupts, which is rational, like a waking consciousness emerges in this dream space, and it transforms it. You can do things that you'd never done before in swimming around in this dream world. And so we're in this kind of more like a abstract, not a dream world, but in an abstract rational world, and the integral erupts in the same way that a lucid dream, lucidity erupts in a dream, if that makes sense. So you can sort of, by analogy, cross over. Another thing too that I really learned from Eric Weiss, I mean, he's just really hammering home what Gebser himself said, but he reaffirmed it for me, was that the integral is he talks about concretizing the previous structures of consciousness. So you've got to concretize, you've got to integrate and concretize the magical, you've got to concretize the mythical, and the rational and the mental. It's all of these are present, and together it makes a whole, which is the integral. And I often liken this to, because Gebser talks about the different seats of consciousness. So the viscera, the magic consciousness in the viscera, and the mythic in the heart, and obviously the mental in the brain or the head. And it's kind of like a collective Kundalini experience. You've got this whole axis of being with different centers being animated or activated. And the integral is that whole current, whereas previously we've just had an emphasis on different centers within that axis or that current. So that's another way I find personally meaningful to understand it.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, that was great. I wanted to chime in a little bit with a quote. Actually, you probably have a little. There we go. Okay, so all of this really brought to mind a quote from Gebser. It's from Feuerstein's book, and probably also from some other book, about his experience, Gebser's own kind of experience of the integral. And I'll just read it. I'll just read it because we're coming up at the end of 90 minutes. Maybe a good way to kind of close a little bit. But he writes, thanks to the consciously realized eruption of simultaneity, today's way does not lead back into egolessness, but beyond egoity into ego freedom, that is, into freedom from the ego and egocentricity. It is no longer a matter of being mystically overwhelmed or of absorption, the traditional form of samadhi, but of the sober participation in the origin, which occurs not in a state of sacred intoxication, but in the super lucidity of transparency, when, in sudden enlightenment, satori, the really invisible, which irradiates everything, becomes perceptible. And then just one more passage. in a letter from 1971, Feuerstein saying that Gebser disclosed that he enjoyed an experience that D.T. Suzuki later confirmed as an instance of Satori. And it was when he was visiting, Gebser was visiting Sarnath in 61, where Gautama had taught his inaugural sermon. But Gebser writes, "It was sober, on the one hand, happening with crystal clarity in everyday life, which I perceived and to which I reacted normally, and on the other hand, and simultaneously, being a transfiguration, an irradiation of the indescribable, unearthly, transparent light. No ecstasy, no emotion, but a spiritual clarity, a quiet jubilation, a knowledge of invulnerability, a primal trust. Since Sarnath, I am as if recast, inwardly. Since then, everything is in its proper place, and it continues to take effect, and is, in a way, an irradiation that is always present and at hand." Just felt that was a really good follow-up to your statement, Aaron, about like lucid dreaming and the kind of concretized experience of the integral.
Yeah.
And yeah, does anybody else want to kind of chime in for a few closing thoughts?
I do have a question for Aaron.
Sure.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, so I felt like an appreciation for what you're saying, but I felt like it was kind of more from like an intellectual space in terms of like how you are able to kind of like understand that. And so like I love the Kundalini like expression, but I'm wondering what your felt sense of that is now with this group.
What do you? Sorry. What do you mean exactly?
What are you experiencing right now? Like we're all connecting. You know, we've got a group here. Like it feels intellectualized, but I'm asking like, what is that experience for you right now? Like that you're having and connecting with us.
I mean, at the moment, I'm mostly in a fairly intellectual mode. You know, I'm not having felt connections with you all right at this instant. Although, oddly enough, when I first signed on, there was a bit of a synchronicity. I think it was you or Donna who was talking about the film and about gravity, you know. And I'd just been writing a poem. This goes back years for me, but this experience I had years ago about gravity, the sun being a center of gravity and a center of light. And I was writing this poem. I've had various attempts at doing this, but I was writing this poem about it, and that's why I was late coming on. And this poem is about love, it's about the sun as a center of gravity and light, and that's a symbol of love. Anyway, I won't go into the details, and then I sign on, and someone's talking about this movie where gravity is love, and I just went, wow, that's synchronicity right there. So, if that answers your question, yeah.
You should share that with us sometime, Aaron, if you feel brave enough.
Yeah, well, it's coming. I'm getting there.
I don't know about you guys, but I felt that.
Flu-like symptoms. The sun is the flu.
That wasn't the flu, honey.
Well, so, all right. Where are we?
Well, a few people are asking about Gebser conferences. Going into details, we have them every year. And Aaron helped put together with Matthew Segal and a few other Gebserians the 2015 one at CIAS, which and there's plenty of archives on the site, gebser.org. It's in the chat notes. So definitely check those out if you're curious about this. And we're also asking about Facebook groups. I don't know. Does everybody? We have infinite conversations. I mean, it's our community space. It's open source programming, so everything's going to be saved and archived, and hopefully it's user friendly enough. But we don't have a Facebook like discussion group, and we've kind of Aaron, Marco, you and I have gone back and forth about that a little bit.
Facebook.
Yeah, we're not sure about going ahead with the Facebook group. Because then everybody will be on that, and then nobody will be on infinite conversations, and we're kind of trying to create a kind of a, you know, intention.
A different center of gravity.
Yeah.
Well, I was asking specifically for a person if they were on Facebook, since their Google name was a geological formation. So I wasn't
Sandstone.
if that was a real name or not. So a couple of people have spoken. I'm like, oh, I want to connect with them on Facebook to have that like individual connection. And I respect the desire to have the group conversation on the group space as well. But I was very focused, Jeremy, and wanting to connect with a particular individual. Thanks for calling me out on that, by the way.
Okay, yeah, just like, yeah, I mean.
What is a real name? What is a real name in a perspectival space? Are names just kind of perspectival constructs that would identify us as singular beings?
You know, the shift to like this multiplicity of identity is an interesting question about aperspectivity. Avatars, right? My avatar is myself, that kind of thing. Oh man, we could just geek out, guys. We could just geek out the whole night.
Well, we're gonna do it again.
We are.
Can I just make one recommendation on the? We were talking about love as gravity, and one of my favorite books in the universe is this book called "The Universe is a Green Dragon," and it's just beautifully poetically written, and talks about allurement as this universal force. And I think Aaron and Donna and Kim, yeah, I think you all were talking about it as well. So I think you'll just love it, and it has a lot of just beautifully metaphorical understandings. And yeah, so I'll put a link in here.
Thank you. Great. That's Brian Swim, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's Brian Swim's great. Writes a lot about cosmology and mythology and physics and cool stuff.
Yeah, and big history. Yeah.
Mhm. Cool. I guess we should
Can people hear me?
close up.
Yeah.
Yeah? No.
Hey, Zach.
No.
Yeah.
We can hear you.
Yeah, people. Hey, thank God. Sorry, I've had to switch between like 3 different devices in order to get my voice heard. The Google gods were really unhappy with me.
You look like you're on your cell phone or
I
iPad.
found my voice to be heard on my cell phone. No, I just wanted to close on one thing that I keep thinking about. Kim, you asked about like the felt sense of a perspectival, whatever the hell, integral. And I just wanted to give some examples of my felt sense of it. I'm actually not feeling it right now, so I think it comes on and off, and it's not always stable. And it, for me at least, it has to do a lot with how much rest I've gotten. If I feel like when I'm more sleepy, I slip down further and further into lower consciousness structures, and I didn't get a lot of rest last night. But one of there's two things recently that have been coming up for me. One is I'm a spoken word artist person thing, and I was doing an experiment with allowing different voices to come up in me on stage as a impromptu to find my own voice at first, right? But then I found that it wasn't only my own voice that was coming up, and I was like I was sharing the stage with this constellation of other voices that were also me, and they started having conversations with each other, and each one of the voices also has an embodied sense of itself and a way of thinking and being in the world. And that's one example of how I feel the integral space. And another one was I also sell books on Amazon partially for a living, and Amazon has this cool little app that can see like a corner of a book and identify it in like seconds. And so I go to this place called the Bins that has like mountains and mountains of used books, and I'll just scan the app over these mountains, and whenever one pops up that's worth money, then I'll like take it. Well, see, that's like a very like technical, rational sense, but sometimes when I'm doing it, I'll actually sense myself as part of this great social creature that's called Amazon that is like feeding me, and I'm like acting as one of its eyes that are sensory organs, and then whenever the sensory organ senses the right thing, it feeds me, and I pick up things and feed it back into into giant social organism or whatever. So that's another like felt experience of it. I don't know if that helps, but there you go.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
That's awesome. That's great, Zach. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's an interesting question. Maybe we can get into it next week as we go into more of the structures. If everybody wants to, we can kind of comb through, because Gebser goes through. And then the first 70 pages, the archaic, the magic, mythic. But it brought to mind the kind of connection that the technological and the rational has with the magical, and this idea of like being wrapped up in sort of a vegetative connectivity, of interconnectivity in the magical and the mythical, kind of reasserts itself in the technological mental rational age through virtual means, and it's kind of an interesting twist on things. Anyway, we can keep going. But yeah, I guess we'll bring it to a close, and I just want to thank everyone for participating tonight. And sorry if you couldn't hop on the microphone, but it seems like most of us did. Hopefully Lauren will get you on next time, and Peter West had one thing to say, but it looks like he's not here, so hopefully he'll be on next week as well. So yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thanks everyone. That was wonderful.
Thanks, Jeremy. Bye, guys. See you, Marco. Bye, Donna. Bye, guys. Bye, Samson.
Bye.
All right.